Today we're talking about Beyond the Gates of Antares from Warlord Games and a recent news announcement for this particular game that probably by pure chance almost lines up with its 10-year anniversary. And that would be this article right over here talking about how the rules development of the game is going to be fan driven. And we'll get into some of the details of that here in just a moment. But of course, this game was Warlord Games' answer to Warhammer 40,000, released back in 2015. And it's approximately a D10 version of bolt action. I say approximately because it had a whole bunch of sci-fi stuff bolted onto it. And it was somewhat prophetic in the sense that small drones became a very major part of the battlefield, except that only one or two of the factions ever thought of strapping something that goes boom onto the drone and flying it into a target. So when this game was released back in 2015, I played it a heck of a bunch. My friends and I all absolutely loved the game. We didn't really stick around with it too much after Star Wars Legion came out, but it's still one of my more favorite rule sets, even if the rule set was kind of a mess when it was initially released. A lot of the sci-fi concepts in the game were kind of interesting, but we won't go into the details of that right now, but it's definitely a little bit different twist on science fiction than you'd expect with many space opera type franchises. Now, sometime around 2022, there were some decisions made about the future of this game by Warlord, and it was going to be moved over to their SkyTrex company. We'll talk a bit more about that as well in the not too distant future, but that is a, quote, sister company of Warlord Games, and they were going to manage the game as well as the miniature line itself. And in particular, Tim Bancroft, as well as Rick Priestley, were going to still be managing the development of the rules and the eventual release of a second edition of this game. Now, SkyTrex is a miniature and model railroading company right here. You can see they've already have one of the other not so successful games from Warlord Games in the form of Cruel Seas. And back in 2020, Warlord Games put a huge investment into this company. We can look back here on a UK website where we can see a lot of the history of some of the formal statements pertaining to this company right here. And in particular, we're kind of curious to one that happened around 7th of July, 2020. Right down here, notification of Warlord Games Limited as a person with significant control on June 23rd, 2020. And here's that document right here. If you scroll down a bit, we have the line saying the relevant legal entity, which I'm assuming is Warlord Games, directly or indirectly 75% or more of the shares in this company, and also talking about the voting rights in this company. So hopefully that kind of sets up the scene a little bit as to what's going on here, which brings us back to that original article I mentioned at the start of the video about how Antares is now going to be fan-driven in terms of its rules development. So if we look at some of the details of the article here, most importantly, from 30th of October 2025, Tim and Rick are no longer supporting the Antares rules and universe development in any official capacity, semi or not. They will be stepping back from running this site and the social media and Facebook page. And you can see here that Antares development, this site, and Antares social media has been handed over to a player fan keeper team to manage on behalf of fans who are welcome to develop their own Antares as they see fit. And in particular here, they mentioned that the master keeper of this group is going to be Jamie Morris, who is known for producing an Antares army builder, and we got a link to that particular application there. One thing that is not going to be changing is going to be the miniature line. If you're hoping to get your hands on the STL files for some of these awesome Beyond the Gates of Antares miniatures, well, that's not going to be happening anytime soon because SkyTrex is going to still be manufacturing the miniatures. And we're going to take a look at one more detail from that article. All we ask of the new keeper team is that they respect this largesse. I had to look up that word too. It's basically about giving gifts and generosity to somebody. So they're probably saying they want the new fan keeper people to respect Antares and keep the Facebook page and this site dedicated to the Warlord / SkyTrex models and advertising, with the exception of excellent conversions for use in Antares and of course mainly ferals and freeborn. So if you're hoping to be able to develop your own STL miniatures for Beyond the Gates of Antares and promote them on this social media stuff, they're not going to let you do that either. Even though the game rules are not really in development by the company, they're still hoping to sell miniatures to the player base. Now, this is a bit of a different approach when it comes to, quote, sunsetting, for lack of a better terminology, a tabletop miniatures game. The reality is nearly every tabletop miniatures game produced has gone on to be canceled at some point or another, but the fact that the company is handing off rules development to the fans, but also trying to manage the miniature line is a little bit different. Normally, when a company cancels rules development, they also cancel the production of the miniatures and pretty much the inventory that's out there. Well, that's all that's going to be ever made. That's all that's left. And if people want it, usually the prices tend to climb up pretty high. Now, several games in the past have actually been canceled and gone on to have some sort of large community support, whether official or not, behind them. For example, back in 2010 when HeroScape was canceled, a group of fans went ahead and started making custom units for the game to replace the fact that Hasbro was no longer manufacturing any miniatures at all for the game. And that continued even to this day, where they have gone ahead and used miniatures from other games and then brought them into HeroScape, gave them a lore, gave them rules, gave them all sorts of cool abilities. And this particular set of units were designed to integrate well into the existing units that Hasbro made back in the day. Now, another example of this type of community management was with Ninth Age. Now, this was a, quote, 9th edition, of course it's very unofficial, of Warhammer Fantasy Battles after Games Workshop canceled that game. And one thing they did was, in addition to updating rules and creating new army books that actually integrated some old stuff that Games Workshop had gotten rid of, you could also go ahead and purchase digital STL files so you could 3D print off new miniatures for your armies to use with these, quote, updated rules for Warhammer Fantasy. Now, in both these above cases, the miniatures were either not being produced anymore or a lot of them were not being produced because some of the Age of Sigmar stuff could be used with Ninth Age and so on, and that was a bit messy. But more importantly, both these community projects were definitely very unofficial, and they were just players carrying on the game. And there wasn't really a profit motive going on behind the scenes for either Hasbro or Games Workshop for either of these two community projects like there is right now with SkyTrex and what they're trying to do with Beyond the Gates of Antares. It will be interesting to see where things go for Beyond the Gates of Antares over the next few years. HeroScape, during that 14-year period, well, there were several thousand diehard fans that kept the game basically alive, and this whole custom unit thing did help in getting the game relaunched, even though there were a few hiccups along the way with that not so successful HasLab campaign. But that is a very, very different story. Now, back in this article, they do mention, however, rules developments, extensions, alterations, army lists, and such are up to fans and players, much as, and they talk about how an additional game has been done this way for a while now. What is not really clear from this article is when the fans come up with new characters for the game or new units for the game, if SkyTrex will be making new miniatures, or if they're just planning to maintain the set of miniatures that exist for this game. And then that might create a situation where the players are going to want to fill in those new units with 3D printing and STL files, which then is going to likely eat into the money that SkyTrex is hoping to be making by still selling the miniatures. So who knows how that tension is going to work out, but it'll be fun to watch over the next few years to see if players still stick with Beyond the Gates of Antares, or if they're going to slowly drift off to other games like the recently relaunched Conflict 47, maybe back to Warhammer 40k because that game has changed a lot over the years, or quite possibly they will try out Star Wars Legion because, let's be honest with you, that game, well, it used to be kind of a Fantasy Flight version of Beyond the Gates of Antares in my opinion. But alas, that's a whole nother topic altogether. Well, anyway, thank you guys all for watching this video. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. I thought it'd be fun to take a look at this situation Beyond the Gates of Antares and just kind of compare it and contrast it a little bit with how some of the other community managed games have been over the years. And of course, if you are interested in 3D printing, head over to fracturedcolony.com to check out my line of 3D printable gaming miniatures. And I need to fix this one that I broke on a recent video recording. Oops. But the most recent guys here from the crowdfunding campaign just a month or two ago are now live and available for sale if you missed that particular campaign. All right, I'll see you guys all next time.